Stars Evolutionary Astrology Radio. This is your host, Kristin Fontana. I'm here today with SïmÄn Vorster from Sweden. We are discussing Saturn in Capricorn, or Saturn in the 10th house. If you have that signature natally, we do have all of us Saturn transiting through the sign of Capricorn at this time on this planet. So this is going to feel relevant to you whether or not you have it natally or not. And so I would like to welcome back to Guiding Stars SïmÄn Vorster. Welcome back.
Thanks very much, Kristin. Yes, you're right. Everybody has Saturn in Capricorn at the moment.
In fact, SïmÄn got a download from Kristin before the show started. About all Kristin's Capricorn
Right on.
experiences, the responsibilities of parenthood and
Right.
all of that.
Yes.
And so you've got some Pluto and Capricorn children. I have Pluto and Sagittarius children. But my Pluto and Sagittarius children, one is in college, one is entering college, and oh dear, they're growing up so fast. Hold on to those moments. That's all I have to say. Saturn in Capricorn, oh my gosh, Capricorn in general. But when transiting Saturn is in Capricorn, it can create this feeling of running out of time.
Yeah.
And time is an illusion. I remember Jeffrey saying that. I'm like, oh, thank God. It's just way too much pressure, all of this.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, it was a great relief when I remembered, not learned, but remembered that we had more than one life. Because I wasn't raised that way. My Saturn square the nodes, 10th house moon was raised with the belief that this is the only life you get. So, make it great. And and then when I realized, this is crazy. There's no way we only get one shot at this. I mean, where's the fairness in the people that are living in these third world countries and just having a terrible time with it and living on the edge in every moment, wondering where they're going to get food? That doesn't feel fair at all. I'm transiting Mars is in Libra right now, so I'm all about what's fair, what's not,
Right. What's balanced.
But anyway, it is definitely a relief to know that even if, you're really going through it and for whatever reason, that you aren't running out of time at all. Or if you are feeling that this is a life, truly a life where you've come here to evolve. We all know that because because it can feel like things are there's always this pressure, an inner pressure. That's a Saturn feeling too, or Pluto and Capricorn, Saturn and Capricorn, a pressure to go further, push the limit. And so since Capricorn connects to the fears that we also have, its shadow, the fear or our resistance to that growth, maybe because of a past life experience when you did step into this new zone or into a world that you've never experienced before. The unknown can be scary and create some insecurity. Capricorn is a cardinal archetype, so it does want to burst into those new experiences, but there's always this gut check, it's always like checking with yourself as you do it. But the bottom line here is that while Saturn and Capricorn, Saturn rules the sign of Capricorn, while it connects to the archetype of time, you are not running out of it. That's the good news today. We have plenty of it.
We're not running out of time.
Yeah. Well, at least in this lifetime. And the other thing too, I know I'm in my 50s now, so everything starts to feel different in the body and in the bones. That's Capricorn too. Whether it's menopause or just the natural aging process, like getting out of bed every day, I'm like, I hear my bones crack, 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 crack. I'm not a big fan of that, being a Sagittarius. I don't want to age at all. I just don't want anything to do with it. So anyway, we're going to talk about all of that and what it means to have it natally in your chart as we progress through this hour. But I didn't give you a moment to talk about things that are going on for you, SïmÄn. If there's something you want to promote or let the listeners know about that you're doing, please do that now.
No problems. What am I doing? taking it very easy at the moment. So I would say that for people that are interested in, you know, learning more about the work that I do and reading articles, and if they are interested in booking, you know, astrology conversations with me, then the website that you can find me at is www. And the word is raising, as in raising the heat, and then there's a hyphen, and then vibrations.com. And yeah, that's my website. That's where I exist on the interweb. So if you feel a desire or calling to go and check out what we do on that site, then that's where I exist. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thank you for all you do to get the good word out on the
Literally.
subject here.
Yeah.
All right. Well, how do you want to set this up? I kind of dove in because it was just feeling timely. I just, you know,
Yeah.
have plenty to say about the subject, but we are all experiencing this current Saturn and Capricorn transit. You know, before we get into the natal, Saturn will leave Capricorn next year and then come back in, right?
That's
and then
right.
leave next year. We've got a dance going on between Capricorn and Aquarius. So there's a revolution on its way, or a rebellion. Maybe it's personal, maybe it's national, maybe it's international. Of course, the planet is going through a great deal right now with Pluto and Saturn crossing over their own south nodes, this patriarchal symbol. So what are your thoughts about those transits, or that transit in particular? Pluto won't enter Aquarius for a few years now, but
yeah, I mean, you know, there's definitely a lot to say about it. I would say that just to kind of put out some themes about Saturn dynamics. I actually have Saturn in the 10th house myself, but we had spoken about my own Saturn when we were doing Saturn in Scorpio, because I've got Saturn in the 10th in Scorpio. So, you know, a lot of the things that will show up for Capricorn themes is how we actually establish boundaries, healthy boundaries between ourselves and other people. I think that people with lots of Saturn material, Capricorn material, are learning how to define themselves in ways that are through determination, through an active psychological state of I'll get through this, and that just got to keep slowly progressing in a direction, because ultimately on some level the archetype of Capricorn in itself is, you know, it's pushing us to define things, it's pushing us to establish boundary, it's pushing us to move in a not necessarily a direction per se. It's not like, but there is an element of achievement or success, or to be successful in something, or to accomplish something, or to be an authority in something. And it's not like Hollywood type of success. It's more like the ability to apply consistent attention towards something so that it develops like a maturity, right? So in a feminine way, you can see Capricorn in its truest sense, which it really is an archetype that reminds us of cycles. It reminds us of how time operates when we initiate something, and how long that cycle takes for it to culminate itself. And so it's about maturation, right? We're coming into maturing in something. And that's why you were talking earlier about, you know, Saturn being time, and Saturn is associated with time. And in its feminine nature, the yin aspect of Capricorn is reflecting to us the way that we are maturing in our own time. And that works through our consistent application of emotionally understanding what we are experiencing in each day, and each week, each month, and we cultivate our emotional connection to our life. So Saturn wants to, and Capricorn wants us to, if we have these themes, to understand emotional integration, right? Bringing our sense of self into this world, and through that defining it. And that's why, in classic astrology, you would always see that Capricorn, or the 10th house, it's always representing the house of career as an example. And while that is true in the sense that our world that we exist within defines success and achievement through a status of career, it's very much influenced by a deeper kind of programming theme in our culture and in our world that is being that's coming from a masculine approach. So what seems to be something like go and achieve something outward in the world and define yourself like that in a masculine way, which is yang, it's going out there. You're still establishing definition. You're still establishing who you are inwardly in the outside world, and it becomes a public expression. So, I am a doctor, as an example. That would be the kind of Capricorn 10th house Saturn theme. But really what actually you would want to truly identify with is the inner emotional reality of somebody that maybe has a sensitive side to themselves, that has a genuine care for people's well-being, and has an interest in service on some level. So emotionally you would identify as those things, but our outer persona becomes this Capricorn theme. So these are kind of like the literally the definitions of Capricorn. And if I sort of look at something more along the lines of relationships, you've got the cardinal axis, which begins at Aries, or you can start at Aries. It involves Cancer, the 4th house, Libra, 7th, and of course Capricorn in the 10th. And what's really interesting to me about your question, you talked about Kristin and the curiosity around Saturn transiting through Capricorn, the South Node in Capricorn at the moment for all of us, Pluto and Saturn's transit, still in its I would say there's 3 cycles to this, and we're kind of in the 3rd cycle of it, because Saturn and Pluto have already crossed each other before. And you talked about patriarchy. Relationships seem to be very how relationships operate in healthy ways seems to be a very large theme with this Pluto Capricorn stuff. So let me explain that. Well, I'm a Pluto Libra soul, and so at some point the South Node has already squared my natal Pluto. It did that when it was at 29 degrees Capricorn. At some point, Pluto will square my natal Pluto, and at some point towards the end of the middle, like the beginning of next year, that's when Saturn goes into Aquarius. It's going to square my natal Pluto. So there's a lot of themes for Pluto Libra souls where Saturn in Capricorn and this Pluto dynamic is influencing them and make like bringing material to the surface in order for them to process through. And relationships is obviously the theme. And what is it specifically in relationships? And it's how in the past, a lot of the theme in relationships and human interaction has been rooted in a kind of Judeo-Christian type of way of operating. And you've had a lot of gender roles that have played out. The man does this, the woman does this. This idea of savior, the masochism and sadism theme, the Judeo-Christian surrender, guilt, victimization. And so a lot of these themes I've noticed come to the surface for us collectively, where we are dealing with a tremendous amount of shadow work at the moment. And it has a lot to do with displaced emotions. So I've experienced for myself personally, but a lot of people that have got Pluto 10th house, not all, but a lot of Pluto with 10th house themes, where a huge part of their inner work has to do with really trying to order their emotional reality and try to put it into context for themselves, and to really begin to reclaim unprocessed early childlike or childhood trauma, where they weren't able to reclaim their authority. This is another 10th house Saturn theme. And collectively, we're all trying to do this. We're all trying to reclaim our authority. And what that looks like is reparenting ourselves. And these are very, like, these are, I'm naming themes here, but like if you had to go into each of them independently, it would all come back down to the same thing. But they've got such, these themes to me seem so incredibly important for everyone right now. And again, particularly Pluto Libras, because they'll be affected by it the most in terms of growing up with relationship patterns that they could clearly see that mom and dad, for instance, didn't really want to live these gender roles. They wanted to be more free in themselves, but felt stuck, and they didn't really get parents that mirrored healthy relationships. And so Pluto Libras are already trying to find their way in how to be in a relationship and not be codependent, or to be in a relationship and to feel that their choices and when they establish boundaries don't like affect the other person's well-being, and the please dynamic, like people pleasing concept. So there's a lot here where, as I said, again, working on collective boundaries, like how we define ourselves, how we're like, for instance, if you look at gender politics at the moment, you can see, at least through my eyes and understanding the way that our psychological health develops, there are a tremendous amount of souls that are, especially with Pluto transit through Capricorn, we're all trying to redefine ourselves. Like we're all going through a kind of like identity crisis, and everybody's trying to find where they fit in this new world and who they are, and they're trying to find out what their sense of identity is and their authenticity and how that gets rooted in. And a lot of it has to do with this redefinition, and part of that redefinition is also realizing and having to work through psychological and emotional wounds that come through a collective repression, where, as you mentioned, in a kind of patriarchal world, the positive side of it was that it built a society that we can exist in a very comfortable way. The negative side of it is that it never actually fully embraced emotional reaction or responses as healthy behavior. So there is a lot of collective distortion at the moment, where that repressed energy that was keep on being held down by a kind of Saturn blanket of control, now that control is kind of breaking apart, and we've got Saturn transiting through the 10th house, there's a lot of material coming to the surface for us to try and make sense of. And it can be very difficult and challenging for most of us on some days, because there is a lot that's there underneath the belly. And you just have to listen to Jeffrey's talk about Pluto transiting in his school. He talks about Pluto transiting the 10th house as an example. And this is not necessarily a Pluto 10th house conversation. It's more Saturn, but still that, we're going to be processing, and a lot of fears, a lot of uncertainties, a lot of lacks, a lot of repressed emotions going to come to the surface for us to deal with. And I think that we have been collectively under this Pluto through Capricorn transit for a while. And we've also, with Saturn being here for the last sort of year and a half too, it's really been pushing us to become very awake to what it is that it means to have these Capricorn themes reveal itself in the collective awareness. And I think that when everything moves into Aquarius, there's going to be two things that are going to happen. This is my observation. One, there's going to be a lot of souls that are going to feel as if their environment and their reality is too restrictive for them, and that there's a necessity to break out of it. And I think that that's what's going to really catalyze a lot of change socially for us. And two, there's going to be a lot of people that would have not been able to know how to do these things, and will actually find themselves really struggling to deal with the amount of like trauma that will come to the surface. And I think there's going to be two sides. There's a lot of material, a lot of energy in our awareness that we're having to process through. That's, a lot of people are going to be traumatized by things, a lot of repression. So yeah, it's a very interesting thing from my point of view, at least. There's a whole entire 3-hour discussion that I can have on this thing, because I've really been paying attention to it a lot, to be honest. Anyway, that's me. It's like 3 hours later.
That's fine.
But
I also was thinking, one of the things that while you're mentioning that people's lives, realities are going to feel so too restrictive that they're going to want to do something about it.
mhm,
I also feel it's a big one um, for next year in particular. Of course, everything will be coming to a head in January for a lot of people with so many planets in Capricorn. You'll be knowing full well what it is that is creating that kind of squeeze,
mhm,
wanting you to do something to break free from that. It can be that something's run its course and you're ready for a new chapter, you're ready for a new reality, you're ready to commit further to something, to put the time in. It can be a time where of graduation of sorts, whether it's emotional or literal, that you're coming into. So yeah, there's a lot of big energy going on. So, in terms of, I'd like to talk about what it means to have Saturn natally in your chart in Capricorn or in the 10th house. And when we think of Capricorn, we do think a lot about the nature of conditioning and how we were conditioned by our family, by our culture, by society.
yeah,
Of course, if it's anyone in the consensus state, which is 75% of the population, or even souls that are in the individuated or even spiritual that were born into families that were more conditioned, then there's going to be a lot of that these souls are subjected to, whether it's through religious conditioning or just really strict parents or being forced to grow up fast could be part of it. uh, and I just wanted to remind people that when I discovered that Saturn really, how influential it is in your chart, how it can color so many things, it conditions every other planet in your chart. It's like literally, like, I've used the example of living in a home and having the walls, the floors, the ceiling all be in the whatever sign your Saturn is in is going to be energized by that sign. And today's talk, it would be Capricorn, the floor.
yep. Oh no, have we lost you?
Went off in my brain when I realized that Saturn placement, how it is influencing and conditioning all your other planets. So remember that. For example, if you have Venus in the sign of Sagittarius, but you have Saturn in Capricorn, that Saturn in Capricorn is wrapped around that Venus in Sag, which means that Venus and Sag souls, that's like the free spirit, truth out talking. I love an adventure. I really need some humor in my life to keep things light. Maybe I have a hunger for travel, international travel, fascination with other cultures. But you put that Saturn in Capricorn, and maybe there's a cultural environment or upbringing that doesn't allow a true, honest expression of that Venus to come out, because maybe it's a great deal of repression, and that soul doesn't feel like they can be who they want to be without being judged for it. So
Mhm.
you have to really start to work with that Saturn energy is so, so important. So conditioning is a big part of this, and growing up fast potentially uh, might be a theme for somebody with Saturn and Capricorn in the 10th house. It can be a soul who has a very ambitious nature. They really want to climb that mountain and are very motivated and by their pursuits along these lines, very determined to reach a specific goal, very serious about it. And in terms of being recognized for this and their reputation, very important pieces for this soul to accomplish or to come to a place where they are uh, an authority even of something. And we have some great charts. I'll give you some examples of this in a bit. We wonderful charts for that.
Yeah.
So anyway, what else? I know you know a lot about this with Saturn in the 10th. I'm just kind of touching on some of the things that I feel like are really.
Yeah, as said, Saturn 10th house souls, things that you will come to really work with in this lifetime is establishing boundaries for yourself, being able to know where your emotional space begins and it ends, and so that you can establish healthy relationships where you might find yourself taking on too much responsibility for other people, and feeling sometimes a little bit that maybe becoming a little bit resentful because other people might not be picking up the amount of work that you're doing. But really what you have to be understanding about yourself is that not every single person is Saturn in the 10th. So you've got to begin to ask yourself which people you feel you would like to contribute Saturn energy to something, and which people are that just need to understand the Saturn lessons for themselves in their own way. And it's a really healthy thing to understand about yourself, so that you don't like overextend and help all the people instead of really for those that are generally at that point in their life. And it's not like a bad or a good thing. It's just being able to protect yourself from your own self. Saturn in the 10th. Other things like determination, discipline. Saturn in the 10th also wants you to work a lot with self-mastery, the ability to master your own destiny, to become your own authority in that way. And that comes a lot with the ability to understand where your boundaries are and what you're comfortable with and what you're not, and leadership. These are key themes that can be bestowed upon you if you choose to pick up the archetype of Saturn and invoke its lessons. Another thing about the Saturn 10th house theme, and I'm curious that any of you that are listening to this that have got Saturn 10th house themes, do you have a majority of Leo energy, or that you've got Leo energy in your chart, like maybe 2 or 3 planets in Leo? Because what I've noticed with this pattern is that there is a general theme of imbalance where you, like Kristin had said, you grow up very fast, you get a lot of things given to you. And then when you do actually get an opportunity to take a rest, like Leo, just to do something creative and fun and spontaneous, that you find yourself like having an argument with your own psychology, going, oh, maybe I'm failing, maybe I'm not doing enough, etc. Whereas there is a kind of balance point here with Leo energy to be creative and to be spontaneous, and to not be too rigid in the ways that you do things, because it can become something where you become emotionally frozen or blocked in that way. So those, I would say, are my core suggestions or themes that would naturally come with this house placement. And
I had thought of another one while you were talking.
Yeah.
I can also see this too as somebody who's a late bloomer. In terms of they feel that they really have to earn their position, or their, sometimes people, because of their ambitious nature, feel they have to go get a bunch of degrees for something, right? They have to earn their way through something, that the degree is important, the certificate, whatever it might be. So sometimes they feel like if they've spent enough time and energy on it, right, then they would be able to be viewed as somebody who had earned that post, right? So,
Sure.
Whether it's somebody in the military who's got all these medals on their, is it medals? What do they wear? No, I know that there's another word for it, on their uniform. Or somebody who's just climbed up the corporate ladder, etc. And I say late bloomer, it's really not so much a late bloomer, it can be that, but it can also be somebody who's really covered a lot of ground and really done their research and really worked hard to have earned that status or that post or that position.
Yeah.
would be in the way. Yeah.
100%. 100%. Mm-hmm.
And also just like feeling like you got to put in your time before you feel qualified or before you feel people will take you seriously. I think that's part of it too. I mean, I remember I've got a couple planets in Capricorn and my moon's in the 10th and Aries, but I remember even getting into astrology in my 30s and thinking, oh my gosh, I mean, I wasn't 20 something. I lived a little bit more on in the world, but I really felt like I was completely wet behind the ears in many respects. I just feel like I really needed to put a lot of time into, feel like I really, just to gain some footing on the climb, because of course you're dealing with people's emotional realities, you're dealing with their soul. And so, here it is 20 years later, but as those of you that are doing this work or studying this work know, there's so much you feel you still don't know, even when you've really learned a lot and and spent a lot of time doing this work. So I can really relate to this experience of feeling like you'll always be climbing,
Exactly.
but that it takes some time to really mature into, especially a body of work like this, which is not only timeless, it's just bottomless.
It's yeah.
There's so much here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway. Well, would you like to get into some charts and we can fill in more of the blanks?
Yeah, I mean, I know this is the chart that you offered us. So if you want to give us your thoughts on what this chart represents, I think I've got this one and the other one.
Okay.
That one over there, Saturn and
Wait,
Capricorn in the
no,
second
this
one.
is the wrong. Oh, wait, that one that you just put up is the wrong. It's supposed to be PM, not AM. Would that change it?
It's possible. Let's see. Okay. So we've got the right chart now.
Yes, we do. So this is a chart of a pediatric heart surgeon. And look at that north node, by the way, in Libra, conjunct Venus in the 5th house. We think of Venus and Virgo. We think of 6th house energy, Virgo energy, connected to health, the world of health, fixing things that are broken. The 5th house obviously is a house of the child.
Yeah. Look at that. And there's, like you said, it's in Scorpio as well, the Sun, Mars, Neptune theme in the 6th house there. So, this is clearly somebody that's got a strong connection with the regenerative process.
Oh, definitely. And this is all, well, the Sun, Mars are balsamic, but Neptune, Mars are new phase. And when you think of Mars, you think of a knife, right? Cutting
Mm-hmm.
into the body. And you think of blood. That's Mars. And here's this surgeon, right? I think of Scorpio as the surgeon or the priest. They never do anything halfway. And so, obviously, Saturn is in Capricorn in the 8th house, which is
Yeah.
a Scorpio house. I mean, this is like go big or go home, kind of the kind of soul. He never did anything halfway. He was always the top of the class, the quarterback of the football team. And you can see here Saturn is squaring the nodal axis. And there's definitely been lifetimes where he did not feel like he could either accomplish what he wanted or something was in the way of what he wanted to do. And so this is a soul who made the most out of every minute of every day. And I remember hearing that, right out of high school, and when you think about becoming a doctor, you're already looking at many years of college, right? Got that
Yeah.
moon in Capricorn in the 9th also. And so he graduated from high school at 17, so a year younger than most kids do. And he did his undergrad in 3 years instead of 4. and then went to medical school, and it ended up doing a 10-year residency at Duke. Now, for heart surgery, he didn't even graduate from his medical, from residency and all the education he had to do until he was like 33 or something like that. Even with graduating from high school a year early and with only having to go to because he just took this heavy load, he wanted
Yeah.
to maximize his time. And so not only do I want to be a heart surgeon, I want to be a pediatric heart surgeon. I want an extra year of college. Crazy. But anyway, I say that because it just seems crazy. That just seems like way too much school. But you clearly something that he needed to do for himself to get his power back, right? That Saturn and Capricorn squaring the nodes. There's certainly lifetimes where he's butt heads with other authorities, in particular parental figures, I would say, but somebody who seemed to have control over his time and what he did, in his life. It maybe perhaps too that there was a lot more he wanted to do that he couldn't. This is a guy that he travels all over the world to teach other doctors how to work in surgery with minimally invasive techniques. You've got Aquarius on the midheaven, so very advanced technologically speaking, when trying to figure out how to minimize injury when you are working on a patient.
Yeah.
And so anyway, this is a classic, an extreme example, I would say, of Saturn and Capricorn. Very ambitious, always very driven, and wanting that kind of status and reputation. Certainly came into this world with a special sense of destiny, that strong fifth house. I think that Pluto could be in the fifth. I'm probably pretty close to that birth time, but one of the ways that Pluto in the fourth could play out when a soul is so focused on their school or their education or their career, then the emotional development kind of takes a back seat, right? They're not working so hard on probably that part of their reality. And so, there's an emotional youth, I think, that comes with that when people, kind of direct their energy and focus on something that they're trying to manifest versus the inner realm, which would make that fourth house Pluto really relevant here.
Well, you can see that, like, just to add some things to what you were talking about, the Saturn in the eighth house, or, with that moon Saturn theme there's a new phase relationship between those two. So, this is a soul that seems to be on the path of, really redefining themselves in an entirely new way. And that would speak to probably that Uranus in the fourth, which would, speak to prior lifetimes where the soul was trying to liberate itself from whatever emotional and psychological image it had prior to this life. And what's also really interesting about, like you said, about him is that determination. It was looking out ahead and saying, this is what I want to accomplish. This is what society defines as the road I have to take. And so Saturn in Capricorn through the eighth house represents a kind of commitment to a path that, over time reveals, dedication. I don't think that you can become, the type of role that this person plays in their life, medical surgeon, without some degree of determination and dedication. It's not easy to go to medical school. It's like everybody just goes and does that, right? There are times where you are really, really pushed to your limits, and I think this is a clear indication of how determination and perseverance and choosing, like you said, to commit to something has led them to achieve whatever it is that they set their sights on. So goals, as it were. But as you mentioned it before as well, that typically in a kind of society where we are very much driven towards that, we can not necessarily give a lot of attention to our emotional work. It doesn't mean that there isn't emotional capacity there at all, in fact, but it would suggest that there is a part of the soul experience where coming into one's own emotional reality and dealing with feelings that have happened in the past, growing up, etc., are also acknowledged and heard.
Exactly. I was thinking too, though, just along the lines of that Saturn and Capricorn, it can take a while to warm that soul up and kind of get them into their emotional body.
Mm-hmm.
And with the North Node in Libra and Venus, the ruler, very close to that. I mean, obviously, this is the soul who's learning to listen to what other people need too, not just himself.
Mm-hmm.
The South Node in Aries, which will require, allowing those sensitivities to exist and to be more vulnerable in those spaces.
That's
There
right.
is definitely a childlike quality of this soul, and an insecurity, I would say, when it comes to these any kind of emotional challenge, really not maybe having the experience, I think, to really rise to that occasion. And so, of course, where the soul is headed is to really embrace the other, listen to the other, and make their needs equal to his own. Of course, that absolutely, in terms of helping others and caring for others, is a part of. It's almost like at times he can appear closer to a patient than someone in his own family,
Right.
because there's that distance or that separation, or there's that, he's put on this pedestal, right? And so that allows a relationship to be cultivated in that way. So there's and adored and worshipped actually. But anyway, there's a need to access more of the emotion. And we think about the polarity of Capricorn. It is about really, and they are very soft inside, very emotional, sensitive, tender people. Not everybody, but majority of them. That is really a big part, I would say, too, of this soul's essence. And there's so much power, so much beauty when the soul can allow themselves to be vulnerable and receptive in that way. So anyway, just some thoughts on this one. And I know you've got a great chart too. I want to give you time for that.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll jump onto that. I just wanted to say one thing that I found was super inspirational, and also something that spoke to your original question, your original sign sharing about, what this conjunction with Saturn transiting through Capricorn for all of us is doing, and over the South Node, and in this chart, and not necessarily in this chart per se, because we're all individuals, but what I found really interesting. There's this little kind of story where it goes along the lines of we look outside of ourselves and we chase this kind of shiny object, right? And we set our goals, and along the road Capricorn, we can choose to make decisions that are for the greater good of getting to the goal, and that might mean, not necessarily being like pushing people out of the way to get that shiny thing, as it were, like not really taking consideration for people's feelings and experiences around it. We can kind of climb on that. We can use people. And when we get to this kind of shiny thing that we experience, we see that it's actually pretty hollow. This thing that we've really tried to achieve for and go for, we've set this thing, and it's very hollow. But inside of this hollow thing, there's a kind of box, and we go inside and we kind of explore what is inside the box, and it's a mirror. And it might not actually resonate with many people, but to me, it resonates so much with the Cancer Capricorn axis, and a lot of the Capricorn theme is that it's progressively becoming less and less. And that's what I think has to do with a lot of the planets going over the Capricorn archetype, is that we're finding that a lot of the ways that we've defined direction and the things that we wanted in our lives, as we pursued them, we lost our way. We lost of who we truly are. And along that road, as we've lost ourselves, we've kind of created a kind of world that really isolated a lot of people, and we never got to fully experience richness in our lives. Again, not every single person, because me and you are sitting over here, we've experienced these things, but it's very collective. It's kind of collective sharing. And a lot of the time when we actually, this is pretty much what the polarity point of Pluto is trying to say when Jeffrey talks about it, is that what we're ultimately trying to really reclaim within ourselves is the remembrance of ourselves, and the remembrance of these desires that we have, and the things that we chase, etc., and the way that we define things and how we accumulate stuff. And I think we're all getting a very strong indication of things that once meant something to us that maybe now have actually given us nothing more than just an outside appearance, or we've tried to attain to things that have really left us emotionally barren. And a lot of the time we are able to actually come into a reflection of ourselves through Capricorn. And Capricorn, Saturn, Capricorn actually does ask the soul to reflect a lot on their nature, and particularly the choices that they've made in the past, and what they've brung, and why they have been the way that they have, and what's the root behind that success, or the drive. And you'd be really, really surprised at what you would actually find drives you to do the things you do. And sometimes it can be things like out of insecurity, like I'm going to prove myself, and so therefore, because dad didn't give me that validation that I needed, and so I'm going to go out there and do that. And then you kind of have a Pluto transit to your Saturn as an example, and you really have all of this stuff come to the surface and things start to break down. So it's a really interesting thing that I also feel is very valuable for a lot of people that I speak to that are really dealing with a lot of Saturn stuff at the moment, particularly because Saturn's in Capricorn, that we really should ask ourselves the question, what are we seeking when we apply our Saturn energy? Because we are giving time to something that we're not getting back. And even though you said that, the time is an illusion, in a sense, it's true. However, there is an aspect of what you invest your time into, it's going to nurture it. And if you're investing it into something that, rewards you with nothing more than something superficial, then there's an opportunity for reflection on that.
Well, that's such an important Saturn word, reflection.
Mm-hmm.
I remember too that Jeffrey used to teach about Saturn and Capricorn being linked with the archetype depression.
Yeah.
But he likes to use the word reflection instead. It's a necessary life for reflection. It can create an experience of depression because there's a gravity that the soul can carry because of reflecting upon the past. But it's when we reflect upon the past that we're able to make more conscious choices in the present, so we can change our future. It's kind of like going through a Saturn return, where all souls who experience a Saturn return are deeply reflecting upon the choices that they had made up until that point in their life, whether they had gotten married and decided, hey, this isn't forever, this isn't the one for me, or they'd committed to a profession or an area of education and it just wasn't mirroring there's your word, mirroring, like the box with the mirrors inside. It wasn't mirroring what it was that they envisioned for themselves. And the classic experience at a Saturn return would be, is this all there is?
Yes.
And of course, there's so much more than this. That's the Neptunian phenomenon. There's so much more. than meets the eye. There's so much more than this. But we do need to reflect at times so we don't recreate the same mistakes or the same realities that have caused us pain or heartache or hardship. We have to be able to stare something in the face and get real with it. Saturn is about getting real, not avoiding something, taking responsibility for whatever it is we have created for ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I think we'll just quickly look at this chart. It's the chart of Oprah Winfrey, and I just thought it was interesting that it would be another way to see a Saturn 10th house theme, where this is a soul that is in the public eye. You know, Capricorn, very much public. It doesn't necessarily have to be that you are public in that way. You can actually have some Neptune stuff to that and not want to be in the public. But generally speaking, people with Saturn in the 10th house are going to have some form of public image that is part of their way of being, you know. And so this is a soul that you can clearly see is, you know, not only has got Neptune in the 10th, so it's come through the kind of public airwaves of television and stuff, but also somebody that has really, I don't know how to describe it, to be honest. I would say that it just seems really interesting to me that she would have Saturn in the 10th, considering that she's at some point in her life became politically active towards supporting communities. She's done philanthropy work. I don't have any sort of bias towards Oprah, you know, positive or negative. I just have, you know, what I've read on the net and observed her. But she's a great example of a Saturn 10th house soul. That sorry, not 10th house soul, but Saturn in the 10th house, where most of her life is also defined, as you were mentioning, that wherever Saturn sits in your chart, that's going to color, you know, the rest of the chart as well. So she's a public figure. Everybody knows her, and she's seen as, she is the most wealthiest African American that's there, you know, available and alive today. And this is something that if you go onto the internet, everybody knows her to a certain degree. So yeah, that's really what I wanted to bring out with this chart, was that if you wanted to get an image of what it means to have Saturn in the 10th house, this is one of those people that seen in the public eye.
Yeah, definitely with Neptune in Libra, retrograde up there, and Saturn in Scorpio. I mean, that reflects, you know, the Neptune is kind of like an icon. You know, she really
Right.
is. And Saturn in Scorpio reflects just the power that she holds in the place in this world. And Saturn squares her Venus and Sun, and it's just well known that there's a lot of abuse that she experienced
Right.
growing up. Since Pluto square Mars in the 11th. So, you know, she's really been on a mission to help whatever underdog or whatever person who might feel powerless or poor or taken advantage of in any way. I mean, she wants to give voice to those that don't have one. She wants to, you know, to speak the truth on the stage that she can support. And it's all about people for her. She's just a master at she just has a natural way with people, with communicating a message, with changing lives, with changing viewpoints. I would say with waking people up to something. There's a high degree of shock value too here because of what she's experienced in her own life. Just, I know that she doesn't want to never just wanted to have a talk show to talk about nothing. She wanted to talk about something.
Right.
You know, something major, something big, something life-changing. You know, and also it's not a secret that she's struggled with weight her whole life, which I feel like so much of that has to do with the trauma that she experienced and what she probably, the emotional holding that comes with all of that. Even if you feel like you've done a lot of the work, it's all about wanting to fill that void, right?
That's right.
And the Jupiter is the ruler of her entire chart. It's retrograde. in the 6th house in Gemini, Jupiter can have a lot to do with, expanding something, right? And the whole health piece here. So Jupiter rules her moon. Moon would be, your belly, right? The belly where you put the food. And so there's some themes here that connect to kind of the emotional piece linked with the eating, and the struggle within that.
Correct.
Very often, of course, anybody with an eating disorder, all dis-ease is rooted in emotional unrest. And so anybody that has struggled with anorexia, bulimia, or just being overweight, knows that it's rooted in something emotional that has not allowed them to feel very good about themselves. And
Yeah.
so that is about kind of trying to fill a void and that empty feeling inside when something horrible has happened and you don't know how to make it feel better.
Yeah.
So anyway, she's a powerful lady. So thank you so much. This was a great show. Saturn in Capricorn, Saturn in the 10th house. All you ambitious souls who carry that signature, you know what we're talking about. We're all feeling Saturn in Capricorn right now. I guess we're all feeling the effects of what that means to have the signature there. So hopefully this helped those of you who know somebody who has it or has it yourself. And Simon and I are going to be back next month when we discuss Saturn in Aquarius, or the 11th house.
Yeah.
And if there are any subjects you guys are dying for us to talk about that we haven't, we're talking about what to discuss in 2020, just email Simon or myself and we will discuss it together and see if it's something we want to put out there on the airwaves. But thank you so much, Simon.
Same to yourself, Kristin.
Okay. All right. Take care. Until next time. Namaste.